Welcome to this museum moment. It is my pleasure to join you, or to have you join me as we finish up our week on partnership and allies. When I think about that word ally and what it means to be an ally, I think it's one that we're all really kind of struggling with or thinking about right now. What do we need? What do other people need from us? And I think this particular story about Jay Larkey and his doctor bag, his medical bag, his doctor's bag, gives us an excellent way of exploring that idea of allyship. And to me, it's stepping in where you're needed, when you're needed, and doing what is needed from you in that moment and saying, okay, this is what I'm here for. This is what I can bring to the service of this community, and being active and available for that. And I think this is truly a story of that. I am excited. Hi, Robin. Welcome back to Milwaukee. It's nice to have you back in town to share this one. And it's a book. It's a story that I think when we think about great objects in museums, we have so many objects in our permanent collection, and this one is in our archive, but is not part of our, is not on display all the time, mostly because it was given to us after the museum opened. But with that said, it's a piece that I keep coming back to. I use with school groups. When Arts at Large had an exhibit a couple of years ago on the March on Milwaukee, they used this exhibit. When we had our Allied in the Fight exhibit, we used this exhibit. And it's an interesting piece because if you think about it, medical bags or doctor's bags are not something that most kids are aware of. This is the piece. It's a little beaten up. It's about as big as, my TV table that I'm looking at right now, say 2 feet across, 1 feet big, wide, and you open it up and you can see all of the different compartments where you could keep vials and syringes and wraps and things like that. And it harkens back to a different era, an era in which a doctor made house calls that he would need, or she would need, to have their medical equipment available to them so that they could go out and, care for people in their homes, which is not something we see so much anymore. And this particular bag has such great Milwaukee history, and certainly in the realm of artifacts, that we're always looking for artifacts that are both interesting to look at, which I would say this one is, and artifacts that are connected to a great story, which this one also is. So let's get into that story. This doctor's bag belonged to a guy named Jay Larkey. And when I think about all the museum moments that I've done to this point, and then listening to Jay Larkey's oral history that he did with the museum in 2007, his interviewer was Elliot Bernstein. And we're excited because my archivist, Jay, is going to actually post this in the next week so you all can hear it. It's a great, great, great piece of history. It's kind of like he has a greatest hits of other museum moments. He talks about his family's history coming to America and settling in Milwaukee. He talks about New Method Hebrew School. He talks about Washington High School. He worked at Mount Sinai for many years. And I think this inspired a future episode where his mother actually grew up in Sheboygan, and I'm super excited to at some point get into the Jewish community of Sheboygan. I know that probably we have a lot of people who would be interested in helping with that piece, who are committed from that community. So he grows up in Milwaukee in the kind of West Side Jewish milieu. He actually goes to Congregation Emmanuel, where he is confirmed. This is a picture of him from Marquette. He was in AE Pi fraternity, the Jewish fraternity there. This is a picture from that. And when World War II starts, he enlists in the Navy Officer Training Corps and actually works in the Great Lakes Naval Hospital for a while, and comes back to Marquette and starts going through med school as paid for the Navy. At the end of the war, the Navy is no longer paying for that program. And so he finishes med school with the support of his parents, and he starts his residency and practice at Mount Sinai Hospital. He becomes an obstetrician. And I think in one of his obituaries, I read that he delivered over 5,000 babies, which is kind of amazing. One of the things that Jay and his wife talk about is their commitment to social justice and how active that looks. And he really gets this from his wife, and he credits her again and again. It's one of these things in the oral history that I adore, because he talks about when he's talking about social justice or his action in the civil rights movement, he always goes back to his wife, Hinda. And he starts by saying that Hinda, where does she get it? Her family was her father had been a socialist. And he said, he was the type of guy that if he had 2 shirts, he would have given one of those 2 shirts away. But he never had 2 shirts to give away. And that they were very much, that she grew up in this atmosphere of anti-war, anti-bias, and that the civil rights movement was the obvious thing. And the thing that pushed their early involvement was intact busing in Milwaukee, that they saw all of these students being taken from African-American schools and bused as a classroom into white schools, kept separate, totally marginalized from the rest of the school, totally, he describes them as being jeered at and yelled at, and that he felt, and Hinda felt, that they needed to take this on. So she actually chains herself to a bus. I know Molly spoke about this yesterday, and this is a picture of her chained to the bus. And he always felt like, I'm not that person who's chaining myself to a bus, but I totally support my wife in her decision to chain herself to a bus. There's a great story about this, that after she's arrested, he can't find out which jail she's being held in, and he finds 2 detectives that he had delivered their wives' babies. And finally, they're like, we'll figure out where she is. Don't worry about it. They become involved with Father Grappi and the March on Milwaukee. And he is describing the sense of what this looks like, that housing wasn't appropriate, that there weren't enough houses available, that people didn't have places to live, that they couldn't rent. And so he feels, and they step into this together to try and respond to what is being done in Milwaukee and how to take care of this community. And so Hinda is part of the marches, but Dr. Larkey, Jay, does not see this as his role. So he instead comes back from the marches, the march, the first night of these marches, and describes the following scene. Give me one. My computer is, there we go. He says, the police really didn't protect them the way they should. They should have. But the populace of the South Side, they didn't want the blacks living south of the valley. And then they would traumatize them. And the police did tear gas them. And whether they did it to prevent any more damage, I don't know. Anyway, they came back to St. Boniface, and I was there waiting for them. And I saw a lot of trauma, physical trauma to these people. And I decided that my role would be to set up an emergency clinic in St. Boniface. So I went to all the various pharmaceutical houses, and we got antibiotics, and we got bandages, and we got all sorts of stuff. And then I went into the community and got a few other doctors to help me. And we ran a clinic at St. Boniface to watch over these people and to make sure they didn't get hurt. And at the same time, when I saw this, I saw some of the evidence of crappy medicine that was being practiced on the Black community. If you were Black and you were poor, and if you were poor, you couldn't see a doctor, and you had to go out to the county hospital for your care. We did a lot more than just take care of trauma for the walks. We did a lot and practiced a lot of medicine. He describes a pediatrician who came in and worked, and he says there were 200 nights, but we did every single night. When there was a march, whatever night there was a march, we had an emergency room. So that he has set this up as a place where people can come and get medical care. And I love that Barbara Beckert has joined in here to say Jay was a great advocate, a respected leader in defending reproductive health and in an all-around mensch. And that comes across so much in this oral history, that kind of passion, that love, and the sense of commitment, and the sense of stepping up where you see a problem. One of the other things that he describes that he does during the later 60s, especially in response to the counterculture, is that he sets up kind of an emergency call line with a number of people that are responding to issues around addiction and reproductive health and all sorts of things that just, and these are the people, kind of the hippies who might be homeless or who might have been kind of written off by their families. He's making sure that they have a place where they can access care and get their needs supported. So I think about that in terms of being an ally, that he's finding ways of supporting community, of engaging community, of being with community, and he's finding it on their terms. You know, he's coming to them, he's setting up the clinic, he's bringing the pieces in. I just think it's amazing. So he died in 2016 after a very long life. One of the things I love the most about this particular oral history is just how much he loves. He was married 2 times. His first wife was Hinda, and they were married till her death. And his second wife was Lois Milwaukee. And he talks about both of them in the terms of how they brought him along in his humanitarian spirit. And he definitely credits his Jewish life with being a part of this. And I think that that is one of those interesting pieces too, because if you see this, you know, and you talk about Jay Larkey, then you don't necessarily talk about him in terms of being really active in the formal Jewish community. But he had such a kind of sense of purpose that was directed from his Jewish heritage. He talks about taking on seders later in life and being really like loving the idea of a seder and actually doing Black Jewish seders because it was such a great way of sharing the idea of freedom. And I think this quote, which came from, again, that oral history, that being Jewish is very important, to take care of your fellow human being and to be good because it's important in Judaism. You don't have to look in the year after. I think that's supposed to be the hereafter. It's while you're living to do the best job you can. And that's the way I felt. And I think that's the way he lived. So I hope to be able to follow Jay Larkey's example. And I appreciate all of you guys for tuning in today for this museum moment. Next week, we are going to be looking at some aspects of American life in honor of the 4th of July. And actually, we're going to start condensing our museum moments to twice a week, just so you're prepared. So Tuesday, Thursday next week. And I will see you then. Thank you for spending a moment with me. If you would like to support Jewish Museum and all of our work, please feel free to check us out at jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. Shabbat Shalom.